So to kick off our morning is another new speaker to this event, Elizabeth Garner. Elizabeth is the state's demographer and joined the Colorado Department of Local Affairs in 2004. She's one of the best kept secrets in state government, I think. The State Demography Office not only provides population estimates, but also recently focused on the demographic trends and changes in our population and workforce. She'll help us better understand what these trends may mean for our business. Elizabeth is an economist by training and a Denver native. Please help me welcome Elizabeth to the podium.
Good morning. All right, demographics. Are you guys ready? You've never had to probably do this before at 8 a.m. or at 7:30 a.m. I've titled this presentation Transitions, primarily because of the demographic shifts that the state is going to be going through and basically already started probably in 2010 and the impacts that those are going to have on the state. These are the general topics that I'm going to be covering in terms of migration, growth in race and ethnicity, changes in age both at the young end and at the older end, growth in high end and low end services, growth in the changes in the labor force, and then what I call demographically challenged income, which I'll leave for the very end. Sometimes I think it's really important to know where does Colorado fit into the entire US picture. And so if you look at the slide above, you'll see that the US has been growing at about 0.7% per year. If we look at Colorado, right now about 5.3 million people, we're growing at about 1.5% per year, so about twice as fast as the US as a whole. Compared then to other states, we're growing relatively fast, but I'll let you know that this is really not very different for the state. It's just in relative terms, we are growing faster than many. In the previous year, between 2012 and 2013, we increased by about 79,000 people, but ranked 5th fastest in absolute change behind some really heavy-hitting states, Texas, California, Florida, and North Carolina, which I think is really significant to show that Colorado can attract and retain population, which is a theme I'll come back to. However, if we look throughout the state, and I know that this is very front range centric, we can see that throughout the state that this is not the case. That the red, orange, yellow states are those, counties, red, orange, yellow counties are those that have been increasing in population, and the shades of blue have not. And so you can see the western slope, a lot of the eastern plains, especially the southeast part of the state, have been declining in population while we've been one of the fastest growing states in the US. And I think that that's an important factor to take into consideration because we are a sum of our pieces. When we change in population, there's two primary components. One is called natural increase, which is births minus deaths. The other piece is net migration. And this slide shows the relationship between net migration and job change. Job change are the blue bars, net migration is the red line. And so we can see that there's a high correlation between the number of jobs generated and the migration to the state. When we migrate people to the state, and this is maybe the most favorite graph I've ever made, and I make hundreds of them, it shows migration by age to the state, and what we can see is who do we attract? We attract youngins, primarily between the ages of about 23 and 37 is our peak attractive age to the state. Now, I'll let you know that every county is very different, so if you've got clients or business in other counties, you can come to our website and see the changes, but this is not just current. This has been our historical trend, so I want you to think back, maybe many of you, when did you migrate to the state? Because I will tell you only 42% of us are natives. So that means a lot of you out there are probably non-natives and migrated here, and what age did you migrate? So taking into account economic forecasts and our demographic forecasts and looking at aging and race and ethnicity, our forecast for the state is to increase from about 5.3 million current to about 7.8 million by 2040. The blue component of these charts shows that growth in the front range, followed by the red, which we are seeing as a growth is in the western slope. However, if we look at it by county throughout the state, and it's kind of in a 3D raised. The darkest colors are the counties that are forecast to increase the fastest or by the most amount of people, with the flattest colors being slow growth. So if the state's forecast to increase by about 2.7 million between 2010 and 2040, about 2.1 of that is in the Front Range, about 1.2 in the Denver metro area, with about 500,000 in the North Front Range and about 400,000 in the south part of the Front Range, with the remaining 600,000 spread throughout the rest of the counties. We're also changing by race and ethnicity, and that is a huge transition for us. If we look at the chart, the bottom bar is 1970, where about 85% of the population was white, non-Hispanic, about 10% Hispanic, and the rest, all other race ethnic groups. By 2010, that shifted to about 70% white, non-Hispanic, about 20% Hispanic. By 2040, we're forecasting it to be about 55% white, non-Hispanic, about 33% Hispanic. And that's a significant change because that is our market. That is who we're going to be selling our products and services to over the next 2 decades. And so we need to think about how is that transitioning. But maybe most importantly is knowing that there's a significant difference by age. These charts showing at the far left is less than 5. With the far right, over 65, again, the blue is white, non-Hispanic, and we can see that our race ethnic composition is definitely very different by age group. If we look at the youngest ages, it's already about 33% Hispanic. So we're not really forecasting a significant change at the youngest ends, but where we are seeing that change is basically from over 18 all the way up to 65 over the next several decades. But this is the population that's going to be buying homes, in your labor force, buying our goods and services. So again, it's an important transition that the state is going through. The next piece is, dang, we're getting old. And we're getting old really fast. But you know why we're getting old really fast? Because we're young. And you're like, what? I didn't have enough coffee. But we are getting old really fast because we're young, because who do we migrate? Youngins. When did we have our first set of youngins move to the state? In the 70s. And I bet many of you could raise your hand and say, yeah, that was me. And therefore, if we migrate youngins, how long does it take to them to be turned 65 plus? Oh, about 30, 40 years. So between 1970 and current, we've been growing this working class population. Now by 2010, our leading age of baby boomers is entering that 65 plus. So we've got a lot of boomers, about 1.3 million of them. Colorado's 65 plus population is forecast to increase by about 125%, increasing from the 555,000 to 1.2 million by 2030, just from aging. You saw in that migration by age chart, we don't migrate a lot of people that are over 65. We primarily migrate youngins. So that's a significant shift for us. Are we all of a sudden going to become an old state? Nah. You know why? We migrate youngins. Because if we didn't, then we would become old. But we're not, because we migrate youngins. This is my second favorite chart I've ever made. And this is significant, showing the age change. So it's population by age. So age is along the horizontal axis, and vertical axis is total population. And we can see in 1990, which is the red shape, our population. And we can see those baby boomers entering our primary age for the working population. The difference between the green and the red is where our age changed between 1990 and 2010. And we can see the biggest change was in the 45 to 64-year-olds. And I want you to think about that age group and think about who was your market and what was growing really fast between 1990 and 2010. I also want you to note that there was very little change in the 65 plus. So if you look at the red line or the black line there, that's at 65, and we can see that difference between the red and the green at that 65 plus, and there was very little change. Then we bring in the blue part. That's 2030. So we can see where we're going to be changing in age over the next decades. And it's primarily at the 65 plus, but also in the younger ages. So when I told you at the very beginning, I said we're going to be getting older and younger at the same time. And that's exactly what I mean, but you see very little change in the 45 to 64-year-olds. And I want you to think about that in terms of your market. So when are we getting oldest fastest? Right now. Right now, between 2010 and 2020 is our fastest growing time period in the over 65 population, increasing by 60% between 2010 and 2020. Oh, we're already at 2015, we're halfway there. Increasing by 60%. That means 6% per year. How fast is the state growing? 1.5. So our 65 plus population's increasing 4 times as fast as our total population. Since when has your market increased by 6% per year, or 60% over a decade? So there's several factors that are affected by the aging in the population, and these are just to name a few. The ones that I want to focus on are, oops, I went too, oh, no, there we go. The economy and the labor force. The economy, very briefly. Think about this. Spending of people over the age 65 support a quarter of a job per person over the age 65. Now I want you to think about, where do they buy their goods and services? Oh, they're primarily a service-oriented age group. Healthcare, eating out, traveling, and I don't want to generalize. I know a lot of you are saying, I don't do that. And that's fine, but they're not your goods buying age group as other age groups are. And that's going to be a significant transition in our economy. The second piece is your labor force. Your labor force in 2010 was about 37% baby boomers. And yes, we know that they're staying in the labor force longer because they want to or they have to. And I'm going to tell you, it's better for our economy if they do stay in the labor force. As income earners, they make much bigger impact as an earner than as they do as a retiree. A lot of people think, won't those boomers just get out of the way and let the millennials come in? Actually, there's a lot of research showing that there is more of an economic impact boom benefit from them staying in the labor force rather than leaving. But over the next 20 years, whether we like it or not, about 1 million of us are going to be aging out of the labor force. And that's going to be a significant impact on the demand for labor force, because this is going to be our fastest growing time period of leavers from the labor force. If you go back to that second favorite graph of the different colors, we have never had a growth in that 65 plus population like we're going to face right now. Our increase of leavers is going to be increasing by over 60%, meaning that the demand for workers is not only created by a new job being created, but also by somebody leaving the labor force. So think about that in terms of, who are you going to be hiring? Are we going to be able to attract the best and the brightest? So there's several factors going to be tightening your labor force that I want you to be thinking about. One, female share of the labor force peaked in 2010, so we can't get any additional kind of bang for our buck with women entering the labor force because we reached our peak in 2010. Structurally, due to our age distribution, we also reached our peak labor force participation rate in 2010 just by age. We've got this growth in leavers, and there's fewer Gen Xers. At first, we were called the baby bust. Now they call us Gen X. Don't know why. But there's fewer of us to bring in those lead positions in your office. And then we've had high and underemployment for the youngins. So they didn't get that first job. They've maybe been a barista for the last couple of years. They haven't been in maybe management positions. So you, as business owners, also have a big responsibility of moving between the boomer and the millennial. And how do you provide the training and education that they may need? I'm not going to go through this one in great deal, but a lot of people ask me, this gives the total population by generation over time. The only thing I want to say is that in 2015, millennials now have exceeded boomers in the state as a whole. And that's maybe a significant transition point in our history as a state. The last piece I'm going to be talking about here is kind of public finance and looking at share of the total economy. And it's going to go back to a couple of slides that I've talked about. I want you to look at the purple line. That's our share of the total population by age group for the 45 to 64-year-olds. Between 1990 and 2010, that age group was a growing share of our economy. And I want you to think about who they were. Oh, they were your highest earning age group. Oh, your highest spending age group. Oh, your highest property tax spending age group. And what do we see from 2010 forward? Oh, declining as a share of our total state economy, our state population. Between 2010 and 2030, what do we see start growing as a share of our economy? Oh, the 65 plus. Lowest income earning, lowest spending on goods, lowest spending on property tax. Significant transition in our economy. So as I had mentioned, I'm going to leave the demographically challenged income to the very end, and I will leave it with that. One, we've basically had this demographic dividend from 1990 through 2010 when we had the growing share of our economy, or growing share of our age group was the 45 to 64-year-olds. And that has changed. Because of our age distribution, our occupational mix is going to be changing, growing a lot more at the high end and low end service, creating more bifurcation within our economy. And that's going to create some challenges. The change in race ethnic makeup is going to be changing, and the only question I have is, can we make some significant progress in the achievement gap by education to make sure that our young generations coming up are the best and the brightest? Household type is smaller and often single, so that in fact impacts housing unit type and cost. And then finally, that youth and underemployment. Significant impact this last decade on our youngest group of workers. And the big question for many people is, will they ever be able to reach what their parents attained? Because they missed an important part of their education in terms of in the workforce. So I will just end things now and just think about Colorado. It has been able to attract the best and the brightest. It's one of the faster growing states. We know that people want to come here. Patty and Henry will both talk about our economic situation, which is very positive. My question for all of you is, will we continue to be able to attract the best and the brightest? Because we know that that's an important piece. We know that we're going to be having this growth in high and low end. How do we manage that going into the future? How do we manage the disparate growth across the state? So I want to thank you all very much for inviting me to be here. I'm very honored to be a part of your session. Demographers don't really ever get to do these kinds of things. We're usually stuck in the office somewhere. But thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to be here.